Now, tonight, we're starting a new series I'm calling The Wild and Religious. Now, why I'm titling that is because we're going to be talking about the prodigal son. Is anybody familiar with that story? Okay. Jesus shares this story, and he shares several stories throughout the New Testament in what he calls, anybody know what they're called? Parables. Now, parables are a way Jesus uses to communicate a truth to people through an illustration. He uses an illustration to communicate a truth to somebody. We're going to be using the story of the prodigal son to talk about two different groups of people. The wild and the religious. Now, the wild represents the first son. This is the son who we see seeks selfish pleasure and lives for himself. He seeks an escape. He seeks another way of doing life. This is the younger son. This is the wild son. And then you have a second son, an older son. He is the religious, which means he's the self-righteous son. He's the one that when everybody's looking, he's always saying the right thing and doing the right thing. But deep down inside, he knows where his heart is. And what's true of this parable that's true of you is that before you met Jesus, either you were the wild son or daughter, or you were the religious son or daughter. You either didn't care what anybody said to you and you lived your life wildly, or when everyone was looking, you always said and you always did the right thing. But deep down inside, you knew you weren't right with God. This is before you met Christ. You find yourself in these one of two camps. Now, I'm going to have some scripture up on the screen for us tonight from Luke 15. We're going to look at verses 11 through 13. Luke 15, 11 through 13. Can I have somebody read those verses for me? Anybody, anywhere? Yes, Mr. Matthew. Loud for us. All right, so just before we get into the first part, which I'm calling scene one. This is scene one of the prodigal son. I want you to envision this like a play or a movie. This is the first scene of the parable. Now, in this scene, you need to understand something. Before we even get to it, we got to understand, why is Jesus telling this parable? Any clue? Why would he be sharing this truth about this younger wild son and this older religious son? Why? Who is he sharing this with? And what's his motive behind sharing this story? Well, you find it in Luke 15. If you have a Bible app, or anything that includes the Bible on it, in Luke 15, 1 through 2, you'd see it says this. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, 'This man receives sinners, and he eats with them.'" So what do you think Jesus' point is in sharing this parable? How many groups of people do you see in just those two verses I read? You basically got two groups, right? You got the Pharisees and the scribes, and which category would they fall into? The religious, they're the self-righteous. And you got the sinners and the tax collectors, which would fall into which group? Yeah, the wild. He is demonstrating to them, to their face, a story that has everything to do about how they live life. This is why he's presenting this. In this parable, Jesus is talking about them to them. And we see that these characters Jesus refers to is that this religious older son represents the Pharisees and the scribes. And the younger son represents the sinners and tax collectors. This is the wild son who runs away from home, runs away from his father, and blows his whole inheritance. We see in Luke 15:11, it said this: "There was a man who had two sons." Two sons. So tonight, we're going to see scene one, and we're going to get introduced to the younger wild son. So here's my first point for tonight. First point is that the wild son thinks of himself first. He always thinks of himself first. Look back with me at verse 12. It'll be up there on the screen as well. It says, "And the younger son said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And his father divided his property between them, the younger son and the older son. So the younger son is so focused on himself, he decides he would rather have a smaller share of his inheritance now rather than wait till later to receive more. There's some commentators that say typically the younger son, if there's two sons, the younger son would receive 1/3 of his father's inheritance. But here's what happened. He did not wait till his father was near his death in order to receive it. So he received less. One commentator says he probably received about 2/9. I don't know what that looks like, but 2/9 of what was owed to him. But because he chose it now, he got less. Rather than waiting longer, he wanted it now and wanted to leave his father. Now notice, what is the younger son saying to his older father by saying, I want my inheritance now? Any idea? What do you think he's communicating to his father? Bingo. Yes. You are useless to me. Give me what is mine and be gone. I'm done. You're dead to me. And he treats his father like this. And yet, how does his father respond to him? He's generous. He's loving. So who do you think in this parable the father represents? Is God. Is God the Father. Is the Father's nature. He is generous and compassionate, even when we're not generous and compassionate. He's loving and caring, even when we would want nothing to do with Him. He cares. And this hits home to us because there's many times where we're like this with God. We want to do our own thing. We're so focused on ourselves, we end up being like the young wild son. And this is not the way it ought to be. So because the younger son is so focused on himself, he didn't care about other people, and he didn't care that he would receive more later if he just waited. So he takes his inheritance, runs away, leaves the possibility of ever having any more inheritance because he took it then and there. I have a story that, as I was reading this, it reminded me of. I had a friend right after college. He was about to get married to a girl from our church. And both myself, Molly, and other people told him, hey, there's some stuff you guys got to work through before you get married. But he didn't want to hear any of it. He's just like, I want to get married. You guys need to stop bothering me with this. Just keep it to yourself. And guess what happened to the guy? He got married, and it wasn't but 1 or 2 years, and his marriage ended. It was over. Divorced. Because he didn't listen. He was so focused on himself that he didn't work through the issues he knew he clearly had. And in marriage, they just elevated. They exploded. Because, hear me tonight. Once you get married to somebody and live in the same household with them, you have nowhere to run. All of who you are is exposed. You are one with that person. And you got to work through that stuff. And he did not want to work through any of it before he got married. And so it just exploded in his face. And it ended. If he had only listened to the wise counsel God was sending him, he would have saved himself from a lot of hurt. The younger son, he didn't want that. He wanted it then and there, and considered his father dead so that he could do things his own way. As we said, God, what we see in the Father in this parable is the heart of God. That even through it all, God is generous and compassionate with His younger son. And for you, there may be some tendencies in you, even if you're saved, to run back to who you used to be. And yet God is still calling out to you. He's still offering you love and compassion and forgiveness. Here's the second thing I want us to see tonight. Look at verse 13. The second thing I want you to see is that the wild son spends what he has quickly to find something he thinks is missing. He spends what he has quickly to then run away and find something he thinks is missing. He tries to find out who he is. So verse 13 says this. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into the far country. And there he squandered his property on reckless living. So many times in life, just in general, and you can see this in sitcoms and in movies, people run away to try to find themselves, right? I mean, who's seen a movie where this is depicted? Anybody? Yeah, they go on this journey and they try to find out who they really are. But in the process, this younger son, while trying to find out who he really is, he loses himself. He loses himself. He spends everything he had because he was thinking of himself first. And this is what happens when we think only and always about ourselves first. We lose sight of things. We lose sight of people. We hurt people. We forget people. We neglect people. And we lose sight of what is really true and what's in front of us. He runs away to live it up. But next week we'll see how all of this comes to a crashing halt. Because it doesn't go as he planned it to go. What's interesting is this younger son says to his father, "Hey, give me what's mine." But did this younger son earn any of it? No. The father gave him everything. And that's true of you today. Everything you have, every ability, every breath you take, the life that you have is given to you. You didn't earn it. It is given freely. James 1:17 says, "Every good and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation of shadow due to change." So what that means is God owns everything. And God never changes. So you never have to worry if God is going to withhold from you or if He's going to give you freely the things you need. Another thing people try to run away and find, just in life, is freedom, right? I think back to when I first went off to college. I wanted to get away from everything I ever knew. I wanted to get away from the system that I was brought up in. I grew up in a Christian household. I knew Jesus. I was saved. But when I went away to college, I acted like that never happened. I wanted to be somebody I wasn't. I wanted to recreate myself, if you will. And I wanted to find that freedom. And at the end of the day, what I was doing with my life, because I was living in sin, I was living for selfishness, I was living wildly. What I had done was, because I was saved, just picture this for a second. Because I was saved, it was like before Christ, I was locked in a jail cell. And I could not set myself free. But when Jesus saved me, He opened wide the gate and gave me the opportunity to step out of the sin that entangled me, that shackled me. And yet when I went away to college, what I was doing was backpedaling right back into that cell with the door wide open. And I know some of us, even though you're saved, are doing that very same thing. Even though that door is wide open to live freely for the Lord, instead of walking freely in it, you instead go back as if you're shackled by sin, and you don't have to live that way. Christ has set you free, so don't let your sin hold you down. Live in freedom. And if only I had seen this sooner, I wouldn't have hurt myself and lived in so much pain and sin. But if you know my story, I met a girl before Molly that I dated who pointed me to Jesus. Now that relationship ended, but God used that to point me back to Him. God used that. I started to read Scripture and I realized, you know what? Life is bigger than just me. Life is bigger than just my plans, dreams, and goals. Life is bigger than my selfish pleasures and all the things I want to do. Life is bigger, and life is made for God. Now, go back to the text. Look at the screen real quick. Where does the younger son go? When he runs away, where does he go? To a faraway land. Why do you think that is? Let me ask you another question. Why would you run away so far to get away from others if you had nothing to hide? Get into your world for a second. If you have nothing to hide, there's no reason, if someone walks behind you, to snatch your phone, turn it off, and hide it. If you have nothing to hide, there's no reason to have hidden images and videos and everything hidden away in folders that are named something else, or downloading apps that are not really apps. They're not really, a calculator. There's something else. You may be like, what? Some of those things exist. If you have nothing to hide, you wouldn't go so far to get away with the thing that you're trying to withhold. The reason the younger son ran away is because he wanted to hide from his family. He ran so far away so his father wouldn't find out all the foolish things he got into. He ran so far away. And sin always does this. Sin always takes you farther than you want to go. I love this quote because it's so true about what sin is. When you think about sin, and whenever you're tempted by sin, you're always like, it's the last time. It's not going to really hurt me. Nobody's going to find out. But here's what sin does. Here's the quote. Sin takes you farther than you want to go, keeps you there longer than you want to stay, and costs you more than you want to pay. And this is case in point for the younger son. Took him further, made him stay longer, and cost him more than he ever thought. All these things are true of sin. But it doesn't have to be that way. Now, this next thing I'm going to say, you're probably like, what? I don't get it. But all these things that the younger son did, they did not require a college degree in order to do. You didn't have to do too much thinking to waste all that you've been given. The opposite's true. In order to earn, in order to build upon what you have, you got to be wise. But he didn't have to be wise. He wasted quickly. He did all this so quickly, foolishly, and wasted everything he had in a matter of days. It says, not many days later, after he received his inheritance, you skip down to the end of that sentence, verse 13. He squandered his property in reckless living. Not many days later. It didn't take him very long. And all he had been given, he should have been able to build on for the rest of his life. Here's scene one in a snapshot. And we're coming to a close here. A wild son wants nothing more to do with his loving father because he only thinks of himself first and ends up spending all his inheritance in a matter of days. So I want to ask you a few questions. Tonight, are you like the wild son in the story? All of us have been like this at one time. In fact, Isaiah 53 says that all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. And the Lord has laid on Jesus, the iniquity of us all. Is there something you're trying to run from in order to find freedom? Is that the case for you? Jesus says, come to me all who labor and are heavy laden. I will give you rest. Take my yoke. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Here's the last question I want to throw your way. Do you feel like you know who you are? If somebody were to say, hey, Nehemiah, who are you? You don't have to respond. What would you say? Somebody would say, hey, Alexis, who are you? Just think about what you'd say. Do you know who you are? Because who you are is who God made you to be. The scriptures say this. Ephesians 4:22-24 says, put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life. And put off all the corrupt thoughts of deceitful desires. And be renewed in the spirit of your mind. And put on the new self created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and in holiness. What that means is you were made for God. One thing I hope by the time you graduate that you know before you go off to college, that Matt has said 1,000 times, is that you were made in the image of God. That's your blueprint. If you're wondering, who am I supposed to be? What am I created for? Go back to that. Go back to what God made you to be. In the very beginning, God said, let us make them, man, in our image. You were made in the image of God. Anything else will disappoint you and take you to a place you never wanted to go. That's why people are constantly running away, constantly trying everything, because what they were made for was a relationship with God and a renewed heart found in Jesus. That's what you were made for. So I want you to think of this. Tonight, I want you to find healing. I want you to think, God, am I hurting in some way? Based on the fact I don't even know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the future holds for me. If that's the case for you, tonight, Jesus wants to heal you and show you the truth. Tonight, if you don't know who He is and you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, I know there's going to be leaders at the back that can talk to you about what that means and get you down the path of starting a relationship with Jesus. Hey, if you're already a believer, praise God. But that doesn't mean you can't be prayed for. If you are going through something, you're like, you know what? I just don't know what to do. I thought of every scenario and possibility, and there's no way out of this. Go find an adult leader. Have them pray over you. Jesus says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. He doesn't want you to carry this. You don't have to bear the weight of the pain and the struggle you're going through right now. Jesus is there to lift your burdens. So I want to give us a second, and I want us to pray. And I just want you to ask yourself, do I know who I really am? And is there healing and truth that I need to find that'll help lift these burdens I'm carrying tonight?